recording. And then kind of get the intro started, because I'd like to get this turned over as quick as possible to Rohin. So welcome everybody to this morning's Global Presenter Series at the COO Forum. We have Rohin Shahi, who is joining us. And as you're gathering, if you joined before I mentioned it, just put your name, your company, what your company does, and where you're located in the chat, so everybody kind of knows who we're with today. And we do have some guests joining us, some people who are considering joining the COO Forum, HR people from our member companies, and of course, our members and chapter directors. If you have any questions during the presentation, don't use your human hand, use a digital hand if you don't mind, just so we can kind of track who's looking to ask a question, and we'll fit you in as it works with the presentation. So with that, I would love to introduce Rohin Shahi. In the course of our executive sessions that we hold, we get a lot of questions that come up about Gen Z, and there were some people had requested having somebody come in and talk about the generations in the workforce. So as I started doing some research on the topic to try and bring somebody in, I ran across Rohin's book, the Z Factor, How to Lead Gen Z to Workplace Success, which I got on Amazon. I got it digitally, which made it super easy to read. But after speaking with Rohin and then reading his book, I really thought that the insights that he could provide would give us a really great perspective on how to better understand Gen Z and how we as COOs might onboard them more successfully into our workforce communities. And I understand Gen Zers a little bit. I have two of them. One of them just entered the workforce this July, which that's yay. And Rohin's book, allowed me to really understand Gen Zers a little bit more and the qualities that they bring to our companies. I hope that from today's session, there will be a lot of really great takeaways that I also learned by reading his book and in talking with him. Rohin is a Gen Zer. He recently graduated from Duke in computer science and is currently employed with Magical in North Carolina. He's a software engineer there. He published his book while he was at Duke with the encouragement of one of his professors, and he can share his story much better than I. So I would like to turn this over to Rohin to share his insights and takeaways, and it's all yours.
Thank you, Laura. Hi, everyone. My name is Rohin. It's great to meet you all. I'm reading through the chat right now, and I love the variety of industries and locations that everyone's in. This seems like a really good group to be a part of and to be presenting to. I think Laura gave a really good background. The kind of story behind the story behind the book is I was chatting with a math professor during my time at Duke early on, and he mentioned that he feels that some of his teaching methods aren't as effective anymore. And so the train of thought that I had was, well, if someone who works with Gen Z every day in a professional setting feels unprepared for our generation, how would people in a more kind of quote unquote white collar environment who haven't interacted with us professionally yet feel when we suddenly enter the workforce? A lot of people seem to think that Gen Z is just millennials, but a little more in every sense. And in some ways that's true, but in other ways it's a complete 180. And so that's what I'd like to share with you all now. Yeah, so without further ado, I'm going to get into the presentation. Let's see. It's always tricky when you have more than one desktop. I think that's right. Okay. So right now you should all be seeing a cover slide. My mouse should be right here. I'm hoping Perfect. That's okay. Perfect.
You're good.
So yes, that's me. And I will go to the next slide. If I can figure out, there we are. Yeah, so feel free to ask questions via chat or raise your hand throughout. Again, I would prefer if you just raise your hand. I'm able to see on the side right now all the folks who are on this call. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to stop whenever and answer them. There'll also be a Q&A section at the end. So who is Gen Z? I always like to put Gen Z in the perspective of other generations rather than as a standalone, because ultimately the other generations...
Hold on. Oh. We got it. I muted.
Perfect. I always like to put Gen Z in the context of other generations because ultimately these other generations impact us a lot. Whenever you look at generational studies, there are three components that people kind of combine, and this third component, which I'm about to share, tends to be overlooked. One is the cultural and social, of course, what is going on in the environment around us. The second is technological. Where is technology and when did we grow up with it? Millennials versus Gen Z have very different views on technology, which I'll share shortly. And the third, which tends to be overlooked, is who are our parents? This is where a huge distinction between millennials and Gen Z come into play. As you can see on this slide, I have 4 generations here. There's actually a 5th who's in the workforce right now called their name isn't as solidified, but the silent generation. They are now in their late 70s, early 80s and throughout, and quite a few members of that generation are still in the workforce today. But the slide was really pretty, so I just included it with the 4. Now, an important distinction, I hope you can see my mouse, is that millennials, for the large part, were raised by baby boomers, and Gen Zers, for the large part, were raised by Gen X. Now, there is some blurring on the edges there, but for the most part, these are very true and true. And the generations we were raised by have very, very different views on everything, on life, on work, so on and so forth. If I was to summarize it in a nutshell, baby boomers tend to be a lot more optimistic. They grew up in a time of economic boom, and they tended to impart those values on their millennial children. Gen Xers, for the other part, on the other hand, have a much more pragmatic nature. As a whole, of course, this is a generalization, but the generation as a whole has then raised Gen Z to have that pragmatism, and that is what we continue to hold as we enter the workforce today. So, I like to keep my slides pretty lean and do talking instead, but of course this is recorded, so feel free to look back at it if you like. On that note, Gen Z tends to be very much of a not risk averse, but risk aware generation. Instead of millennials' optimism, we have pragmatism, I realize I was mispronouncing that, and pessimism to some degree. We are the children of a quote unquote bust generation. That's what Gen X has been known for. They've taken the brunt of economic downturn, things along those lines. And so what does that actually mean for us entering the workforce? As this slide, really quickly imparts, we're seeking a safety net. We want to make sure that if we join a company, at the very minimum, we're in a comfortable place, not just in terms of, on every dimension, from job security to financial compensation, to benefits, making sure we have healthcare, things along those lines. We kind of ignore the fluff, the kombucha stations and ping pong tables that the last generation seemed to have kind of embraced. Of course, that didn't work too well either, but we want to see how our employers are going to take care of us. A recurring theme that I'm going to share throughout this presentation is that there's a shift in the balance. Younger employees want to be toe-to-toe with employers, and Gen Z has come to expect this equality from the get-go. So, a particular example I like to give that worked well a couple decades ago, but no longer usually does, is there was a CEO, GE's John Welsh, very famous, and he was famous for cutting the bottom 10% of performance year over year. That created a very competitive working environment, but at the same time made employees feel a lot less safe, especially since what the bottom 10% include could be a little more of a subjective nature. It's very hard to pit people against each other on very objective measures. So when we look at the generations as a whole entering the workforce, for the most part, of course, this is a generalization, but for the most part, boomers and Gen Xers accepted that employers typically have an upper hand. Millennials felt a little more belittled and are currently fighting back to put employers and employees on even ground, but Gen Zers are entering the workforce fully expecting to be treated as equals. This, what I find when I give other talks and other one-on-ones, is this seems to be pretty well understood, but in execution tends to be a lot harder because people have their own, on an individual level, their own beliefs and expectations from when they grew up throughout and proceeded to be promoted and move through the workforce. So an example I'd like to give, and this is a little on the nose, given that I'm presenting to a lot of COOs right now, is imagine a C-suite executive who had to go through the kind of culling of low-performing employees, had this more grindy culture, and not only survive, but is doing really well in their position. They may believe that it's only fair for new employees to go through the same process and that it works well because, of course, there's a survivorship bias. They were able to reach the point they reached. And since decisions and company culture tend to flow from upper management down, this much needed change of providing an upper hand of a safer environment for employees would never take place. It takes a company-wide push to grant this level of transparency and openness, and it starts from the top down. This is why culture is so important and why you as senior executives need to be proactive in creating the safety net for the next generation of workers. If there are any questions at this point, I think there's a chat window. Nope. Okay, I'll keep moving on. Now, I want to give a note on compensation. A lot of the times when I go through these next slides and talk about some of the things you want in the workforce, I never really mention compensation because it doesn't rank as high as a measure for what people want, what Gen Z wants. That doesn't mean it's not important, because that's what ends up happening. It is very important and feeds into that financial safety net of what I said before. But I think where the distinction comes into play is when these other metrics that I'm about to share, these other aspects of work and life are not hit, compensation becomes less and less important. There are always going to be industries in which you can kind of buoy this not having some of these features of the workplace with just huge benefit packages or compensation packages, like, you know, in your investment banking, for instance, or your quant finance. But if you're not in a position where you can pay very, very top dollar, it's important to take a more holistic view on everything. So here's a quote: nearly 50% of adult Gen Zers work freelance, and this percentage is expected to rise. The reason I included this quote is because Gen Z is very entrepreneurial. And I think this poses as not a threat, but a unique opportunity for employers. So when Gen Z looks at entrepreneurship, the traditional model of not having a full-time job, quitting that, and then having your own business to grow isn't the only form of entrepreneurship that Gen Z is able to embrace now. Thanks to how ingrained we are with digital media and our digital savviness, the rise of new skills and jobs that are just increasingly becoming available, a desire for stability and seeking creative pursuits outside of one's main job, there's this huge culture of work. An example is really me, actually. I work this full-time job, but I'm still able to pursue things like giving talks and promoting my book. And right now I'm writing something else. So this is also an example of entrepreneurship. Yes. And so a survey conducted in 2014 found that 72% of high school students who are now in the workforce had aspirations of starting a business someday, which is higher than other generations that were polled around the same time. The bar to be able to do something like that has become so low that it's now something accessible for everyone, even with traditional work. So what are some practical tips I can share here? Well, the first and foremost is moonlighting is something that traditionally some businesses have not looked very fondly to, but when it comes to Gen Z, it should be embraced. We're very work-oriented, and provided it doesn't eat up into our into the time that an employee spends on their primary job or the level of effort they give, and there's no actual competition concerns, then it should be embraced fully. A lot of my peers do things on social media. They're writers, they're actors, they're musicians, along with working your typical corporate jobs, and they're succeeding because they're able to fulfill these creative pursuits. Now, what else? Entrepreneurship. So typically when people join the workplace as a new grad, as someone who's younger, who's less experienced, the amount of ownership and responsibility they have is limited. I like to propose kind of a flipping of that, maybe not to the same level as an executive would have, but fostering entrepreneurial behavior at every level, no matter whether you're at a startup or a big company, to have more successful employees, happier people, and more efficient operations. Gen Z wants ownership over the work they do. We're incredibly self-led as a generation, and we want to have the chance to shine without micromanagement in our projects. I'm just going to leave it with that. It's something I'm going to come back to. But I want you to start thinking proactively about how you can give more ownership to employees, because they want to approach things from their own angles and be able to kind of show that they can shine. So this is an interesting statistic. I will say this is pre-pandemic, so it may have changed with COVID. But 72% of Gen Z prefer face-to-face communication at work. A lot of people wrongly assume that because we are so ingrained with technology, when it comes to actually working, we similarly want to stay glued to our computers. And this is interesting because I work for a remote company, but as I will share in the flexibility slide, that's something that personally I find very enjoyable because I'm able to travel a lot, and it's kind of something that I was able to balance. But why is this important? So here's where an important distinction becomes clear between millennials and Gen Z. Gen Zers are known as digital natives. We've grown up with technology and have become used to it from the get-go. It's not something necessarily new. A lot of the technology we still use today is just improved technology that we had as kids. Computers, smartphones, everything along those lines. I remember my peers in elementary school, when people started getting their first phones, usually had iPhones, and I'm on the upper end of Gen Z. And so there never was a world in which there wasn't this kind of technological basis around us. And so what we're seeing is, yes, we're very savvy and aware of tech, but tech in and of itself is not shiny enough. I'm going to pick on an industry here because I work in this industry, but we're seeing this contraction in the tech industry itself. For the longest time, executives felt that because the industry was, sexy enough, was shiny enough, that workers would come in and be enthralled with kind of this culture. And what we're seeing now with Gen Z is we have grown up with technology. It's less special to work in tech than in other industries. And so it's not enough just to have that brand of being a tech company for workers, but also these other benefits and aspects of work have to be present. Otherwise, people aren't joining. And we're seeing a kind of weird interplay in tech right now where people are, where there are less jobs available, less people hiring, but also less workers willing to move. And it's kind of it's hard to hire, basically. So tech is a means to an end. Tech is a means to an end. It's a way to improve our daily lives. And we are deeply aware of its pros and cons and don't necessarily want to be glued to it at work. Now, I gave this social media a whole slide because it hits multiple aspects of work. You have recruitment, you have something like content creation, and you have internal usage within the company. So let me hit each of these. Word of mouth is huge for everyone. Especially when it comes to job searching. It's all about finding a fit. So where does that word of mouth get amplified for Gen Z? Social media. Right now, if you go to TikTok is kind of the platform that's largest among this generation, but you'll see that many, many companies have profiles on there in which they're trying to recruit new young talent. And the tactics to use and the methodology of advertising, of sharing, of using influencers is always constantly changing, always in flux. It's a very fast kind of form of advertising in which you have to pivot. But the point is that we want to see authentically made content. We recognize how powerful social media is and use it in every facet of our lives, from communication to entertainment, news to networking. And so you need people who are kind of going to the second bullet, quote unquote, chronically online in your marketing rooms. It's a Gen Z term, but it's very applicable. So when we think about how we can actually make these recruitment drives, how we can actually make content for pure marketing perspective, for just promoting to users, have Gen Zers in the social media room because we understand it best. We're most ingrained with it. And we need to kind of, as a company, you need to create an authentic company image to attract top talent. This image takes time to build. It may feel a little bit different than the image you've built for some time. But allowing for greater transparency into what the work life is at your company, what the work entails, things along those lines will grant a lot of success. A lot of companies are hesitant to kind of put the day-to-day lives of their employees out on the web, but I think this is one of the most authentic ways to showcase how working at your company is like. So all in all, I just want to share that if you aren't already having a social media kind of strategy for recruiting and attracting young talent, that should be a priority for you. And on this last bullet, internal usage, I think within companies, there are a number of ways that people have communications. The most typical is emails, but there are ways in which you can allow for greater transparency and trust, which we seek, without breaking down communications and making that a whole mess. So an example is flat internal communications for any size company. In theory, an intern should be able to reply in a thread to the CEO. That doesn't mean that's going to happen, but I mean, if you look at my company, obviously I vetted very heavily having this background. We have a very flat Slack channel in which people are able to kind of see what other groups are working on, are able to get their feet wet with other pieces of work if they're interested, because they have that visibility into different departments, into different teams, and basically granting Gen Zers the opportunity to, if they want to, learn about different job functions, learn about what it's like to work in some of these other fields, see what's going on in the company on the broadest sense, rather than being completely siloed within their team, within their job function. I took a little liberty in calling this social media, but it truly is once you consider that the social aspect comes from your coworkers upskilling and transferring knowledge to one another. Do we have any questions at this point? Cool. I wanted to leave a quick note here. A lot of people call us the burnout generation, and this is for a number of reasons. This ties back in with the slide I had on seeking stability, but this is a trend that I think is kind of on the up and up every generation. So Gen Xers felt it, then millennials felt it more, and Gen Zers feel it more, and I suspect that the next generation will as well. Why is this anxiety here? One thing that I really want to point out beyond what we're all aware of political polarization, general grimness and pessimism about the future for various reasons, and of course the pandemic, which we all experienced, is growing academic competitiveness. So we've grown up in this environment that is now so competitive from middle school onwards, honestly, and continuing throughout high school and college, that is essentially a very, very scaffolded, heavily kind of rung by rung, climb the ladder experience in which there are guidelines on what to do, how to become quote unquote successful, how to get into a good college. You need your grades, your scores, your recommendations. It's all very competitive and leads to burnout, but it's also very guided. Then all of a sudden, post-college or post whatever graduation level you're at, all of the scaffolding goes away, but there's still that feeling of competitiveness. So as employers, it would be very beneficial, even though you are providing more opportunity for ownership, even though you're offering more of a flexible kind of nature to your work, to give that scaffolding. I'm going to touch on these points on mentorship and feedback, but this is something I just kind of wanted to raise awareness about. Yeah. So on that note, 77% of Gen Zers say that a company's level of diversity impacts their decisions to work there. This is where authenticity comes into play, however, because Gen Zers are very easily able to kind of read between the lines and see when there's some form of greenwashing in the form of environmental concern by a company, or just false diversity initiatives. It needs to be very authentic. And how does that happen, right? If a Gen Zer is looking at a company and they see that the entire board or entire senior level kind of employee base is of a homogenous group, and yet they are promoting a sense of diversity, it reads as very false, because we want to feel that we have a growth opportunity within the company, and we also don't want to feel alienated within the workforce. This is true for every generation, but as this recurring theme kind of shows, we're coming to expect this from the get-go, and it's something that not a lot of people are willing to budge on. When you consider that almost half of Gen Zers in America are non-white, this becomes very, very apparent, because as part of some of these discussions, I work with a lot of tech groups, and it's very apparent that a lot of tech companies want to hire people from less represented groups, but it becomes difficult, which I'll touch on in a sec. So going on this route, what you find is especially in Silicon Valley, many of you who are starting these companies up were able to start coding at 13 or 14 because they had access to internet and opportunities that sometimes diverse candidates do not have. And so companies basically fall back to what they're comfortable with. If someone comes from a well-connected background or went to a top school, employers and recruiters are naturally drawn to them, since there's almost an assumption that if someone has an attractive background, they'll be an ideal employee. And so while someone may believe one thing, they tend to navigate themselves towards something else. What happens is a halo effect. Naturally, people gravitate toward things they're familiar with. Your white tech bro will hire another white tech bro and build this culture because it's something you can anchor onto. So how do you kind of establish this? There was a Kellogg professor, Lauren Rivera, who observed hiring meetings at one firm. And what they found is they were very interested in diversity, but there was a math test that was distributed to everyone. And the team barely paid attention when white men failed the math test, but paid much closer attention when women and African Americans did. So whether this was deliberate or not is beyond the point. An effort to reduce bias actually amplified it. When you look at diversity initiatives, you have to make sure that internally there actually is that sense of urgency. It cannot be just one person at your company or just a handful of people touting this, because it has to align with the overall vision of the business. Now, social media and overall growth of the internet has allowed for activism and social issues to take the stage. We're very outspoken about social issues we feel strongly about and expect companies to do the same. Environmental, social, and diversity initiatives will strengthen Gen Zers' desire to work at a company and likely result in higher Gen Z employee retention. So I want to include this quote. I pulled it from my book, which I included there. And American President John F. Kennedy toured the NASA facility in 1961. He interrupted the tour to talk to a janitor carrying a broom. He goes, "Hi, I'm Jack Kennedy. What are you doing?" "Well, Mr. President," the janitor said, "I'm helping to put a man on the moon." And so what I'm hitting home here is purpose, creating meaningful work. Gen Zers across surveys and studies consistently rank purpose and meaning in work far higher than older generations do, and certainly far higher than older generations did when they were the same age. Simply having a job or role that seems to be meaningful doesn't necessarily make it so. There are plenty of people who work in social impact enterprises, NGOs, and companies like that that find their work purposeless and meaningless. Essentially, they, along with people in other fields you think would lead meaningful careers, don't have a clear view of how the work they're doing directly affects people. Here I'm trying to kind of tie this web together of a lot of the slides we've been on. But as you can see, giving the sense of ownership and letting your employees see the end results of the work they do is so critical. You can do what you love to do and follow your passions, but unless there's a broader impact, then they're more self-serving and self-limiting in terms of fulfillment. So I talked with, I'm forgetting his name, I'll get back to his name, but I talked with someone and I mentioned him in my book, and he kind of stressed that a key way to make work meaningful is showing how the work that someone is doing directly impacts others' lives. There is no product on earth, and I thought about this for a while, no product or service on earth that doesn't have a human at the end of it. The only thing I thought of that may be the case is like, I don't know, like pet food, but even then, people have pets. And anyways, by seeing how your work impacts people, putting the life savings in the company and praying for a happy retirement, work becomes much more meaningful. Gen Z employees will quickly lose heart unless they see the broader impact of the work they do. So Gen Zers aren't as motivated by cash or by fancy titles as older generations. That's something that has been supported in study after study. Overall, they seek responsibility, freedom to pursue interests in the workspace, and the potential for hard work to turn into career advancement. I heavily stress finding out what motivates each of your workers on an individual level and try your best to align the goals of that team with that search for meaning. But I'd like to propose taking it a step further. Gen Zers might have a sense of what they find meaningful, but at the same time, we're new to the workforce. We don't necessarily know. We're still in that exploration stage that has continued beyond college. And so allowing workers to explore different aspects of their career and experiment with other roles and responsibilities for the company is very, very key. You want to grant employees the opportunity to explore roles internally, pursue passion projects, and see a tangible path forward in their careers within the company they work for. Why is this huge? A lot of the discourse over the past couple of years, well, decades now, has been that millennials are job hoppers and Gen Zers look to be doing the same. But when you grant kind of the sense of job hopping internally within a company, allowing people to make those shifts, it leads to a lot better feeling of purpose with a greater sense of the company, allowing for this exploration as well. Any questions at this point? Again, we'll have a Q&A at the end, so no worries there. Cool. Mentorship. Right, this concept isn't new. We hear it all the time, but it's one of those things that we really, really seek. And millennials advocated for mentorship within a company, but we found that with this job hopping mentality that has taken a bit of root, many leave before a strong relationship is actually cemented. A really interesting statistic is that millennials who plan on staying with their organization for over 5 years are twice as likely to have a mentor, around 68, 70%, than not, 32%. So what does that mean for Gen Z? Gen Z doesn't necessarily want bosses, we want coaches, people who we are eager to work with every day and who prioritize the growth of our employees. And it's not just about having a single mentor. These kind of mentorship programs can span all sorts of things. But one thing I wanted to share is on the other side, people want to be mentors. It boils down to what we just covered in the purpose section. Mentorship has a direct impact where the effort you put in clearly affects another person's success. And it's extremely fulfilling, a kind of volunteering for others' careers that is inherently very rewarding. I know I said a lot of my slides are very sparse. This is one where I wanted to just drop some bullets. This is just one example of an additional form of mentorship. But when we think of mentorship, we think of traditional. We look at how older, more experienced employees can share mistakes they made, give experience, teach concrete skills, help us gain footing internally within the company, and offer mentors a chance to kind of have another aspect to their career. What I'd like to propose is an idea of reverse mentorship. What you're finding is a lot more of a two-way communication channel, where younger employees mentor more senior leaders at a company. The mentor, a younger worker, is contributing to the company at a very top rungs of management, which directly impacts their ability to build confidence and feel more invested. And then senior management, of course, has a much better reading on trends shaping the world, learning more about key insights, and just gaining a greater breadth of experience. This unique form comes with clear benefits. I'm just going to leave this slide here for y'all to read. One note that I want to make on mentorship is a lot of people come to me and they say, okay, well, we have managers who act like coaches. Is this sufficient? And I'd like to say, yes, kind of, but not really. Managers can have aspects of a mentor, but it's tricky because Gen Z is, a manager's main objective is to manage, achieving set goals and dealing with, hopefully, reducing the amount of red tape that their employees have to encounter. Frankly, the same level of candor cannot be achieved between an employee and their manager. And so one idea that I like to propose as a very tangible thing is the idea of giving every employee 2 mentors. One within the team itself that they work for, that kind of gives them more of a technical know-how of how to perform the job duties, gives them more advice on their career, so on and so forth, but also a mentor outside of their team within the same company. It can be in a different job field entirely, but someone who has a more bigger picture, broader picture of how the organization runs, who's able to offer a different perspective, may not be as useful for providing technical skills and know-how to that employee, but at least is able to, for instance, if the employee is ready to jump to something new, offer advice on how to move internally within the company. In a survey of 5,000 Gen Zers, 33% said they believe a mentorship program is the most important workspace benefit, which isn't number one. It's only a few percentage points behind healthcare benefits, which, going back to the safety net, is obviously very important for everyone, but Gen Zers are caring about stuff like this and 401ks and things along those lines right from the get-go. So just sharing how large of an impact this makes. Where are we on time? Oh, we're doing good. I'm going to slow down a little because I know I'm talking a little fast, but there's a lot of content. So feedback ties in with mentorship, but I want to share something that's kind of hard-hitting. That was hard-hitting for me when I started doing my research. A national study of over 1,000 Gen Zers and 1,000 millennials found that over 2/3 of Gen Zers say they need feedback from their supervisor at least every few weeks, otherwise they'd quit. And this feedback is not like keep up the good work, it's actual meaningful feedback. This compares to less than half of millennials. So there's definitely an upwards trend. Furthermore, 1 in 5 Gen Zers say they need feedback daily or several times a day to stay with an employer. This might sound crazy, but when you're working in a field in which there aren't those guardrails, in which you're expected to maybe take risks, but aren't necessarily getting a good sense of how your performance is, it becomes very, very important. So feedback needs to happen on the fly continuously. And one thing I'd like to propose that many, many people are a fan of across generations is killing the annual performance review. From research firm CEB, a subsidiary of Gartner, 95% of managers, so these are not Gen Zers, but managers, are dissatisfied with the way their companies conduct performance reviews. In addition, they said that almost 90% of HR leaders say the process doesn't yield accurate information. So through combing through a bunch of surveys, it seems that about 60 to 95% of employees are dissatisfied with these reviews across generations. And of course, this is expected to go up with Gen Z now. So what does that mean? For years now, people have been claiming that performance reviews are dead, but companies continue to use them because they feel that it provides an objective measure, it's regular, and it's just kind of how we've always done things, quote unquote. So what is kind of an alternative? Feedback needs to be circular and continuous. It's not just flowing from upper management down, but peers providing feedback about peers and also up. What you have is a lot of companies have different takes on feedback. Some prefer doing positive because everyone likes to hear positive feedback. People tend overall to do well in their jobs, but they tend to shy away from candor and transparency in the negative. Gen Zers kind of want to hear where they're going wrong so they can improve. It's true for everyone, and it's definitely true for these kind of self-driven Gen Zers. But at the same time, there are industries and companies in which feedback tends to be purely negative, and that's just not good for many psychological reasons. I think that's kind of goes without saying. So companies need to be sure that they're emphasizing that a good range of feedback needs to be provided, both critical and supportive. And I don't want to put the onus purely on managers and senior executives. There needs to be a willingness of a young person who's new to the job to seek their manager out and ask, how am I doing? What we're seeing is that this is happening, but if you are leading a Gen Zer who may not be doing this, figure out how you can make them more comfortable asking questions, being more open in their wants, so on and so forth. I do want to make one more point here in that that is something that you're seeing more and more. I can't remember if I have it on slide continuously, but I want to bring it up now. I think it's a good moment where Gen Zers feel less comfortable, and this is largely a facet of the pandemic, of things being virtual, less comfortable asking questions. They don't want to seem naive. They don't want to seem unknowing. This is true usually for young employees, but it's become truer and truer for each generation. So even if an employee has a question, they don't want to seem incompetent or things along those lines, and they may keep it to themselves and thus hinder their growth. So how can you, as an employer, kind of foster this openness? Few tangible tips: open office hours. Set aside an hour of your time every week to have people come in and ask you questions very directly. Stress that it's a no judgment zone. You know, the whole no stupid questions thing gets a bad rap, but if you word it properly, it's very helpful. Virtual office hours. And yeah, just be very receptive to questions. Have private channels available for your employees to ask any questions, and always stress that, you know, it's kind of a group effort. Yeah. So this is something that becomes a lot more interesting. I think a lot of generational researchers like to very much, when it comes to flexibility, say that a particular generation likes this and a particular generation likes that, without having a bit of nuance. So the whole concept of flexibility is that it's not one size fits all. That's kind of what I want to hone in on. A lot of people say, oh, Gen Zers want work-life balance. But what you're finding is that Gen Z is willing to sacrifice some components of flexibility in expectation for a more personalized form. So on that note about work-life balance, 83% of new graduates are willing to relocate to another city or region for the right job offer, while another 60% consider it acceptable to work evenings or weekends. That is slightly higher than other generations. So it's not so much that you can take a one-size-fits-all approach to Gen Z when it comes to what flexible offerings to grant, but you should consider how you can make it possible to give individual employees their own wants without completely collapsing the goals of your company. So team leads must emphasize custom flexibility within their teams, whether it looks like custom hours throughout the day, remote work, or maybe allowing an employee to wear multiple hats or shift roles internally. There are always going to be employees who are really focused on the immediate job functions, others who are more interested in exploring. So how do you allow that to happen? I want to emphasize how COVID has pushed the needle on remote work. This is something that gets a lot of attention. It's hard for certain industries, but those who move more quickly towards truly custom working models that are well designed and supportive of all types of workers will have the upper hand in recruitment and retainment. Now, what do I mean by these custom working models? What I mean is the employee is able to choose whether to work purely in office, to work hybrid, or fully remote. And having the backbone, having the structure in place to ensure that your company's goals are still met. Those are the institutions that are naturally going to attract more employees, because you're not filtering based off of, no, we're only in person, or no, we're only remote. As we've seen with COVID and with productivity, going remote hasn't actually reduced productivity very much. In fact, on multiple measures, it's gone up. And so this is definitely something that's doable. It's just about taking the time and having the urgency to institute this within your workplace. So we're nearing an activity. This is one more slide. So there's an uncertain future. This is true for a lot of people, but it's especially true for Gen Zers who are looking at the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years of their life in the workplace. So new jobs are being created at an increasing rate, and AI and other things has made everyone fearful about job security. A prediction that a lot of pundits had prior to Gen Z growing up was that college admission rates and let's just say rates of attendance would go down. And what we've seen is actually the opposite. Despite fears over amassing college debt and having seen the impact of debt on millennials, Gen Zers are still electing to go to college and rates are rising. This comes from this need for safety over this fear of the future. So what can we do to kind of make it less uncertain for the future, or rather make employees more better footed for future jobs, future roles, future changes? A lot of people focus on training new employees on hard skills. Gen Zers themselves are hungrier to learn hard skills. And why does this happen? These are more tangible. You can say, okay, I want you to learn to be an expert at Excel. I want you to learn Python, things along those lines. And that's very easily understandable by all levels of the employee base. But what we found and what we're continuing to see is Gen Zers are incredibly good at learning new skills, thanks to technology, thanks to the self-led nature of our experiences. And so emphasizing hard skills usually isn't the most beneficial for long-term growth. What we should do is emphasize soft skills in an early career. And so what does this kind of mean? You want to create moments of community and collaboration, especially in an async online world. Having employees spend a portion of the work week, however small, on learning new skills is essential for the future. It's tricky because everyone emphasizes this, everyone understands this, and there's always the needs of the company, there's always not enough hours, but it becomes an investment, making for more skilled employees, leading to greater fulfillment and purpose within a company, leading to greater retention, and creating the snowball effect. A massive 93% of employees would stay at a company longer if it actively invested in their careers. The key there is active, providing these opportunities for growth, for upskilling, for up-leveling. And this was according to a workplace report by LinkedIn, a statistic that includes all members of all working generations. So, as I mentioned before as well, you want to create a structure of support where you have an open door policy, office hours where questions are encouraged, and offering this kind of custom teaching technique for your employees. That is kind of what I've got. We're going to do an activity now. Before anyone hops, basically what we're going to do is have the participants of this meeting split into two teams. We're going to play a round of Jeopardy. This can, on an individual level, for all of you, you can have as much investment into it as you want. The idea is when it's your round, when it's your team's round, feel free to speak up, feel free to use the chat, suggest what you think. It shouldn't be super hard. It all comes from the stuff I talked about right now. I suspect that a lot of you are going to get most of the answers at least. But yeah, Laura, if you want to kind of share what the groups are, and then I'll go to the Jeopardy screen and share it.
Sure. Fiona, can you drop the teams in the chat so everybody knows what team they're on? We should have just two teams. We're not going to go into breakout rooms.
Where is it? Did you give it to me?
No, I thought you were pulling that together.
Oh, sorry.
I'm just reading through the chat right now. Very nice comments. Emotional piggy bank. Yes. Yes. In the meantime, something I wanted to share that I kind of glossed over because I was worried I was running low on time was the emphasis on mental health. This is something that has been emphasized by many employees, and kind of the traditional view on mental health when it comes to work is a belief that, okay, work is stressful, it's going to probably negatively impact someone's mental health, and it's up to the individual to find ways to A, get support, but also B, find ways to balance that out with their own personal lives. What we're seeing now and what's being led by Gen Z is a dismantling of this belief, is a belief that employers should take an active interest in providing a psychologically safe and psychologically supportive environment. There becomes this interesting dynamic where, and I personally feel this way, and I know many other Gen Zers and many others as a whole feel this way, where there isn't a ton of comfort talking with your employer themselves about your mental health. Again, tying into the safety, you don't want to be negatively impacted there. But at the very least, employers should have resources at their disposal or external vendors who are able to provide the support. And managers and employees should constantly have, as part of their feedback, as part of the circular feedback, a way to have these conversations about how a more engaging, a more supportive, a less mentally taxing work environment can be achieved. I see that we have some names. Perfect.
And a few people dropped off, so it won't be totally even, but it'll be fun. It'll still be fun.
So does anyone have any questions before we begin? Does everyone know how to play Jeopardy? I'll share the screen. I made this using one of the only free kind of Jeopardy makers, so it's a little janky and has ads, but hopefully it works well. I tested it last evening just to make sure. I think it'll work great. Cool. I'm going to drag this up here. Let's full screen it. There we go. So how is this going to work? We have teams 1 and team 2. If people would like, or if they just want to speak up on their own, I don't mind popcorning or just having people speak up. Just saying which category they want to pick. I started the points at 30 because I didn't want to do 10, 20, 30. Have one question be 3 times as much as the others. Yeah, so I'm going to have team 1 go first. And how this is going to work is, any thoughts on creating an in-person workplace that is optimal for Gen Z? Yeah, I'll touch on that afterwards. We'll have a Q&A at the end as well. Question. I think a lot of the notes I said already have kind of tied into this, but I'll make a more hard-hitting kind of point. So we'll have team 1 go first. Laura, if you want to just take note of points, we don't have to actually add them up, but just be like, okay, team 1 got the 30, you got a 40, got a 50, 50, 40, whatever. And then we can tally them at the end. So team 1, what section would you like me to do first? Let me change this to 30. Anyone can speak up.
I guess generations of the workplace.
For how many points?
For 50.
Alrighty. Let's do it. You'll have about 30 seconds. Feel free to just drop your answers in the chat. If you're part of the team, you can speak up. I don't mind there being noise and lots of voices overlapping. The number of generations in the workforce today.
5.
There we go. Yes. The reason I had that as a 50 was I thought people would get confused with the graphic, but I did leave that note at the very beginning. There you go. 5. It's quick. Alrighty. Team 2, what would you like me to pick?
Workplace culture for 50.
Alrighty. Gen Z has high expectations for this in the workplace, even regarding mistakes and failures.
Feedback.
Feedback.
What is feedback?
Okay. It was transparency. I'm thinking feedback kind of ties in. I mean, there's a level of that in here. I think that's an acceptable answer as well. Let's give it, because now that I'm reading this again, and that's literally what I said. Like, feedback should also include mistakes and failures and be more critical. So yes, we'll include it.
We'll take it.
There we go. All right, team 1.
Employee development for 50.
Let's do it. What is the most requested workspace benefit? I said workplace benefit for Gen Z.
Health insurance.
All righty.
Flexibility. Oh, okay.
I made it a little broader, health and wellness, but yes, health insurance, and just a sense that includes everything from mental health awareness. Yes, you have an 11:30 meeting, so I'm going to answer that real quick, actually. Correct answer. And then to answer your question, Patrick, what are your thoughts when that freelance? Yeah, so I mentioned this before. It becomes tricky from a freelance perspective when there is the same industry. I would just try to foster an authentic kind of conversation with your employee in which you basically try to assess whether it actually is impacting a competitive nature. Because naturally, people are going to do freelance work in the stuff that they're familiar with. And with people hungry to work longer hours, with the financial world being what it is right now, people are going to do it. So you'd rather have that conversation upfront than never at all. And so I'll give you an example, right? Like a lot of software engineers, they work full time, but then they'll also do freelance software projects. Those don't inherently conflict with usually the software goals of the company. They're usually pretty independent. You're doing freelance work for someone else. You're leveraging those skills, and it's beneficial. You're developing your skill set even further, and it ties into both of those jobs. I think another kind of, I'm trying to think of an example where it wouldn't. Probably in the financial industry, in financial institutions, there are often very, very siloed job functions for a reason, because you cannot allow information to flow from one end to the other. Yes. So honestly, it becomes one of those one-on-one conversations you need to have. just to be aware of what's going on. Alrighty, we'll go to the next question. And I promise I'll get back to the questions that are also in the chat. I just knew that there was a little urgency there. Team 2, what would you like to pick?
Go with cultural shifts and advocacy for 50.
Alrighty. Given Gen Z's desire for autonomy and ownership, this style of management will definitely rub the wrong way.
Micromanagement.
What is micromanagement? Yes. I only briefly mentioned micromanagement, but it goes, that's why I put it for 50, but yes. So far, all teams have answered everything correctly. Let's see if we can get 100% for everyone. Next question. Or next team, I guess. Team 1 again.
One.
Put generations in the workforce for 40.
Alrighty. Credited with being more pragmatic than the preceding generation, this generation raised Gen Z.
Gen X.
What is Gen X? Perfect. Team 2.
We're going to go in for digital awareness for 50.
Alrighty. It is crucial for a company to establish a blank brand online for Gen Z.
Social.
What is social media?
I'll give this one a half. I said authentic.
Authentic, you did.
We'll give this 25 because it is related to social media. But yes, the key is authenticity. I want to nitpick here because that is something that always goes over people's heads and ultimately falls flat. You'll see that the companies that succeed most when they're establishing brands and sharing this kind of workplace culture are the ones that actually go into the nitty-gritty, maybe aren't afraid to share some of the harder parts about the job, so on and so forth.
So is that just 25 for that one?
Yeah, let's do 25. I'm definitely going on the fly here. Next team, what are we? 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Okay, team 1.
Let's do employee development for 40.
Perfect. These skills will be more valuable for an employer to teach Gen Z.
You're getting some answers in the chat too, Rohan.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for critical mass. I want to always at least
Soft
2 or 3.
skills.
There we go. Yep. What are soft skills? Fantastic. I want to emphasize, it doesn't mean you don't teach hard skills. It doesn't mean you don't upskill your people, but I find that Gen Zers are going to run with it really quickly. They don't need that oversight. Next team. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1.
Let's go with workplace culture for 40.
Alrighty. Entrepreneurship within an existing organization. I can't remember if I used this term specifically, so I'll give you guys some time to.
Entrepreneurship.
There you go.
What is entrepreneurship? Establishing this within a company is very, very helpful. And I think is independent of Gen Z. It's beneficial for any company at any level. Next. I believe it's team 1 again.
It's team 1.
Feel free to speak up. Anyone?
Digital awareness for 40.
Perfect. Where word of mouth gets amplified for Gen Z.
Social media.
Perfect. Yeah. I was hoping people wouldn't be shy since it was answered previously, but yes, this one is social media. Next.
Cultural shift and advocacy for 40.
This aspects of one's well-being is becoming a more openly discussed topic in the workplace, particularly among Gen Z.
Mental health.
What is mental health? Next team. I wonder if you guys can hear the sound effects. There's like little dings and bells. Nice.
Yeah.
I think that adds a little magic.
Team 1.
Cultural shift and
Yes.
advocacy for 30.
Oh God, there's ads.
What is 77%?
There we go. I'm glad you were able to. Good memory. That was right on. I would have
Yeah.
expected like 75 or 80. Or,
Mhm.
Yep.
yes.
Very good. I wrote that down.
Nice.
We'll take employee development for 30.
This training format is being phased out in favor of continual feedback for Gen Z.
Annual performance reviews.
What is the annual performance review? Perfect. We're in the home stretch. I'm glad this whole experience went pretty smoothly. And there wasn't any pop-up ads of, yeah. I rented a car recently, so here we go with the hurries.
Team 1.
Let's do workplace culture for 30.
The preferred type of communication for most Gen Zers.
What is face-to-face?
Face-to-face, in person, all sound. Nice. I want to take a moment here. So my company is remote. A lot of companies are remote, but we're seeing that the companies that succeed most are the ones that still emphasize face-to-face communication in some shape, way, or form. My team has regular pod meetings where we meet in New York or Toronto, and we have offsites every year as well, which helps to build this kind of culture. From a cost perspective, it's no more expensive than having an office building when you run the numbers, and it establishes the kind of flexibility that our company has really honed in on, which is remote work plus some face-to-face to give that sense of connection.
And when you say face-to-face, just to clarify, I mean, it sounds like in-person face-to-face, not just like, virtual teams, video usage or things like that.
Virtual team is definitely better. One thing is virtual teams. I personally believe, I haven't done the research to back this up, but I've seen it in a number of papers and articles. When there are virtual meetings, camera should be on. That establishes a sense of face-to-face. A lot of companies do not have that culture. At a prior internship I had, we did not have that culture, and it was very jarring because it was remote. It was during COVID. So on some level, yes, face-to-face online, but that can also be draining when you have meetings back to back to back. When you're in person, you get a chance to recharge by being around others, also get a chance to step away. There's not that continuous going on. When you look at scans of brain activity, what people have found is when there's not breaks put in place for Zoom meetings versus not breaks put in place for in-person meetings, the Zoom meetings are much, much more mentally taxing than in person. So I think there just needs to be a lot of care if you consider face-to-face to be Zoom, in that, yes, it helps, but it should not be done with the intention of mimicking in-person real life connectivity.
Okay, helpful. Thank you.
Next team.
We'll take generations of the workplace.
This generation spans birth years from 1946 to 1964.
What are baby boomers? Or who are baby boomers?
What are baby boomers? Who are baby boomers? Yeah, maybe I should have said who. Perfect. And last question. I'm going to click it. Hope you all are ready. Gen Zers are known as digital blank. This was a term I used.
Did.
Free for all?
Natives.
Natives.
All right, just sipping water. Yes, natives. Maybe I shouldn't have made that one 30. But in the end, we got almost all questions, minus that one half. I don't know who won. Do we have a...
Well,
it's going to be very close.
Team 2 only got half of that one, so otherwise it was a tie.
All righty. We will congratulate Team 1. Ultimately, you all did fantastic. I was not expecting this level of accuracy, especially with the 77%. So fantastic. I am going to go back to, let's see if I can take you aside. I don't want to like share all my other screens because I got some work stuff up too. Okay. I'm just going to X this. Goodbye. Ah, there you are. Okay. Conclusion. I just left some bullet points here. There's a lot of things I covered, so this is just trying to be at a very high level. I'll give you all a chance to read this. What I want to stress is sometimes people are like, wow, there's a lot to Gen Z. There's a lot to think about, and this is hard. I don't know if we can accomplish this. First and foremost, I mean, I'm sharing what is the ideal. It may not be possible to hit every single point that I shared for your company, but what I really want to emphasize is changing your workplace and building a culture to help Gen Z succeed is an investment, and it has incredible return on investment, given that I think in 5 years, over a quarter of the workplace will be consisting of Gen Z, especially at the newer, the newer employee level will be largely this. So you're going to have an entire cohort of these folks in your company who are then going to be moving on to managers, who are then going to be, running the company in a couple decades, running these companies. So how can you kind of make this investment from the get-go? Huge dividends. Fantastic. And now we will move on to the Q&A. I'm going to start by just reading through the chat to see if I missed any questions. Otherwise, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Well, actually, no, I'll keep sharing it because I got this slide. That's me smiling. I took this picture for graduation photos. Yes, my book is The Z Factor, How to Lead Gen Z to Workplace Success. A lot of the insights and slides I shared here came directly from the book. Some of it was new content as well. If you want a more in-depth look, literally just Google my name, you'll find it. It's on Amazon. If you have any more questions to me, I highly, highly encourage you to reach out to me either via email or LinkedIn. I'm very receptive to that. Thank you for your time. Let's go through the questions. So I'm going to scroll up. Okay, so we got a lot of...
As you're scrolling up, I do have a question for you. Can you double click a little, this is Shaki, by the way. Can you double click a little bit more on the notion of growth? I know you talked about it towards the end there. Should we, or does Gen Z look at growth through a different lens than the traditional lens? Meaning, like, I mean, we look at it as moving up, right? Like, but is it seen through a different lens, or should we consider that?
What is growth? For a while, but one thing that I think is the highest level, biggest kind of approach there is when you look at the traditional view of growth in a company, it's largely been a sense of knowing where one's career wants to go. There's always this conversation that takes place that people are like, oh, I have no idea how I got to this place in my career, just the right pivots happen, interesting things happen, but people kind of have a sense of, I am working in finance, I want to be a CFO at some point. I want to make a partner someday. This sense is starting to break down a little bit, actually quite a bit with Gen Z, in that it is more about exploring, mainly because of how quickly things are moving and our awareness of how quickly things are moving. There's a knowledge that the job that one has right now may be obsolete in 20 years. So when people are thinking about growth, they're not thinking about the linear, how do I reach the place that my boss is in or my boss's boss? That happens on some level, but they're also thinking about, is this the right fit for me? Is this a company in which I'm able to explore the right fit for me and create something that's very meaningful? So growth becomes more holistic. It's not just about climbing a career ladder. It becomes about, do I have the right people around me to support me and to help me explore the mentorship and feedback? Am I able to pursue my creative pursuits outside of work? It becomes a much more holistic view. I hope that answers your question a little bit.
Yeah, I think so. Thank you. Yeah, very interesting. Thank you.
Scott's got his hand up too, Rohan.
Yeah, go for it, Scott.
So Rohin, thank you for the information. Very insightful. And I have to say that it's counter to a lot of my personal experiences with Gen Z. Probably over 8,000 Gen Zers across our family of companies over the past post-COVID environment, maybe three years or so. And also a lot of personal one-on-one exit interviews with interns.
Mhm.
And so I got a lot of questions, but I'll focus it just on two. What do you, or how can you describe or give me an appreciation for Gen Z's approach or acceptance of meritocracy? You talk a lot about diversity, but what about meritocracy? That fact, essentially you get what you earn and through your efforts and your talents. What is their view of meritocracy?
It's a fun question. Let me think. I'm trying to read into the question more as well. Do you feel that there's more of a sense of entitlement, quote, or like where are you kind of getting at with this? What I will say is, I think there is a strong sense of meritocracy because of the kind of academic pursuits we have pursued right now. I think where this comes into play is it's not so much that Gen Z doesn't believe in meritocracy, it's that there's so much opportunity available. Gen Zers are aware that even if like maybe aware that they haven't put in as much work, as much time, as much effort as other people through years of their of being an employee at a certain place. But there's the understanding that there's also a very pivotal opportunity. So if I'm an intern working for a certain company, and I feel like I want to grow very, very quickly, I want to be promoted quickly, whatever, and that might conflict with the sense of meritocracy that you have to spend your time, you have to earn this award. Yes, but it's like I said before, the balance has shifted more in favor of the employee. They recognize that, okay, you're right, maybe it will take more time for me to achieve XYZ goal here, but there's a company across the street, there's another opportunity that will enable me to reach that point quicker. So it's not so much about not having a sense of meritocracy, it's just that opportunity is knocking around the corner in every way. So when you have these exit interviews with interns, it's like they are not as necessarily married to the idea of sticking with a company for that reason. Does that answer your question better? I'd love to have
No, it does. It gives some clarity. And I'll ask my second question. It's kind of blends right into it, which is, sort of their view towards objectivity. And what I mean by that is we do a lot to ensure that people truly understand expectations. There's a lot of metrics. We try to make it as objective as possible to say that you have achieved or you haven't achieved. And it goes back to the feedback loop, right? We are very good at giving feedback. My experience has been is they love feedback, provided that's positive feedback. They need lots of words of affirmation, right? Yes. But when it's black and white to me, there really is no place to run. But I find them, and I say them in general sense, I find the majority, 51% or greater, to want to shun accountability. And I want to know if I'm reading it wrong, or is there something in the environment that is creating that sense of not wanting to be transparent and want to hide?
Yeah, I think this is a fantastic question. And I think it dives into, it's something I've thought about actually. It dives more into some of the negative sides of this, where in a desire for a safety net, people want to know that they're doing a good job. They seek actively this positive affirmation. If you read between the lines for a lot of the feedback, the constant feedback, a lot of this is positive. And it goes back to the sense of ownership, this sense of trying new things. Gen Zers, for the large part, don't want to be locked into any particular, this is how we've always done things, and want to explore, but they also want to have guardrails around them to tell them this is a good thing or steer this way. When it comes to receiving critical feedback then, I think that's part of a larger problem too, in which a lot of people as a whole across generations tend not to receive negative feedback well. But when you look at Gen Z as a whole, as a more specific kind of component of this, I'm just going to shoot straight and say I think the level of positive to negative needs to ratio more positive. That's not to say there can't be negative, but it really boils down to, if I just want to throw numbers around, right? Like if you double the amount of feedback you give to a Gen Zer that you ordinarily would, a lot of that feedback needs to be positive. with the same negative. So if, let's say you have 1 part negative to 3 parts positive for a regular employee who isn't in Gen Z, then you might want to do 1 part negative for 5 parts positive for Gen Z. It's just what it is. We're growing up in a very uncertain time. That's why I kind of had that slide where the sense of security of an employee has been really, really hit hard over the past decade. And so I don't think it's so much a problem with a particular generation or no, it's just more of a communication gap and understanding. I think, yeah. Does that answer your question well?
Yeah, it sure does. Appreciate the feedback. It just may be difficult for a baby boomer brain. So that combination may not be the right one for them.
No, it was a great series of questions. I like it. I like when they're a little more, make you, a little more hard hitting. Yeah, and part of it is also that we're just new to the workplace. Some of this same level of wanting positive feedback is true for everyone who enters the workplace. Millennials, Gen Xers, you're all of a sudden, like I said, the guardrails are off. There's no more of this academic kind of coaching guidance. Now you're fit to do whatever you want in your career, and there's no actual tangible, I need to get into this college, I need to graduate from this college. And so we're very uncertain, and having that positive feedback reassures us that at least we're doing something right. Yes. Yeah, what happened in the transition? Are there any more questions? It's sometimes there's just like, I'm looking at this chat and it's like, what is feedback? I'm like, no, that wasn't a question. That was an answer to the Jeopardy. Yes, Kelly, if you're still on the call, I like the idea of an emotional piggy bank.
So I have a quick kind of follow-up to to Scott's questions. I think you covered a little bit in the language that you use, because you talked about being critical and supportive. And I think if you go into feedback and only provide criticism, that gives an opportunity for a Gen Zer to step out, because that it kind of removes that safety net from under them, right? That's kind of what I've experienced is the critical feedback has to come with the deck, has to come with growth. Is that kind of what you would agree with? Is it that you can be critical, but you've also got to show them that the criticism they're receiving is not necessarily cutting off parts of their safety net?
Exactly. Yeah, it can be as simple as repositioning feedback to instead from going from a lot of people like the sandwich method of positive feedback, negative, positive. It can be reframed from that to simply saying, you're doing really well in your job. I want to start off by saying that. I'm going to give you some critical feedback just because I see these as growth opportunities, but I want to stress that you're doing really, really well. These are just things that I think can help you take yourself to the next level. Really kind of bundling it with the sense of you're still doing well. It's just that there's always going to be areas of improvement for everyone. Because ultimately, if people receive critical feedback without that cushion, it's not a personal thing from Gen Z to then leave. It's more like, this isn't the job for me. I'm not able to achieve what people want. And to your point, Scott, you said you have very objective measures. So you want to, I'm sure you already do this, but just sharing for the rest of the group, when you give this feedback, just be like, you are hitting these measures really, really well. Here's one area of improvement, but I still think you're succeeding in your job. I just want to see you come to the next level so that, if you stick with us, we can promote you, we can give you more opportunities, so on and so forth. Framing everything in that positive light of growth, rather than just pure, we want to see you do more of this.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, that's how we use the feedback. It's like, look, we want to identify where your gaps are. So we're using the subjective measure to say that you're not doing well here, going back to Josh's very good point about providing the support. But with that support, with that continued development, that comes with an expectation as well, that they're going to put forth the interest, the effort, the knowledge, the time, the investment into that to get better. It's not going to suddenly just be given to them. They've got to work to close that gap. And that's the piece that we tend to struggle with, is they either want it to be 100% or nothing at all. They'll walk out. They don't want to do that effort to get to that 95 to 100. Has been my personal observation.
How do you reach that how do you foster that communication to reach the 100%? So you've given this feedback. You say we want to reach this next goal.
Yeah.
How do
We
you
do a combination of both. Yeah, we do a combination of mentoring, coaching. We do offering training as well. So we give them an opportunity to learn, then give them an opportunity to use it, practically apply it to move forward. But often we find that they rarely will show up to the sessions where they're going to get the initial information to position them to now go apply it. When you try to apply it, they kind of throw their hands up and saying, well, I just can't, I'm not good at this. Well, you're not going to be good at it unless you continue to practice at it. And so it's just, I find it very similar to raising my kids. It's that sort of environment, right? They want to quit as soon as the going gets tough. Well, that's where tenacity comes from. That's where perseverance comes from. These are life skills that they're going to need to move forward. And if you can't move through just applying a new skill, along.
I think it was just a good. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So a few notes there. One thing I'd suggest is letting it be a lot more self-led. Ask them, how do you think you can reach this goal? Because oftentimes there might be a mismatch, even if you offer a lot of different opportunities to achieve these goals, there might be a mismatch in the person's eye. I, for one, learn very tactilely. So as a coder, I don't like watching lectures or things along those lines. I like putting my hands down and just doing it. Very specific example, but ask them, how do you think you can reach this goal? And how can we provide the resources for that? Providing them more custom thing. And also, there's also that sense of just, I mean, I'm going to be frank, if a Gen Zer feels like they're not doing their best in a job role, they don't necessarily have the way that employment works now, like the conversations that are happening, they don't have to have this tenacity, like there's not as much of a need.
Swipe left, swipe right. I'll just go to something different.
It is what it is. The silver lining there, though, that I was actually talking with my dad. He's on the older end of Gen X, and he was talking about hiring young people and stuff, and he likes to talk to me about this, and I emphasize this to him, it's not as much of a hit anymore for people to lose an employee as it was a while ago, in that the training cycle is also quicker. People are able to hit the ground running faster. So I wouldn't take it as a personal loss if a Gen Zer decides to leave after receiving critical feedback. They may have already been interested in leaving. They might find something else that's more opportunistic. They don't need to have the same level of investment in a particular company or in a particular role. That's just how it is. But yes, providing them ownership for that. It's just, I'm curious. I'd love for you to keep in touch with me, Scott, and let me know how things go. Yeah, I see people heading off. Are there any other questions?
I'm gonna cap it at that, just because I know a lot of people after this call need to get onto other meetings and other things. So I would just like to really thank you, Rohin, for joining us today and sharing everything that you did. I read the book. There's more in the book. It's available on Amazon. It's an easy buy on digital, but also reach out to him. I will distribute your contact information, if you don't mind, after, just so you can connect to him, but also so he can connect to you. I think in what he's doing, it would be nice to be connected to executives like yourselves to understand more and learn from you. So with that, thank you very much for joining us, and everybody enjoy a great week. We have 3 events in September, just for your information. We've got something on ChatGPT, some practical examples with Jill Tarallo, who's a member in Austin. We also have a workshop on productivity with email. There's more detail in the invitation. And then Josh is going to be leading our executive session at the end of the month. So have a wonderful weekend. Thank you, Rohin. Really appreciate it. And you can go on with your day.
Perfect. Thank you all so much. See you.